I'm Ted Utoft. I'm the UK CEO of BVA Nudge Consulting, and we are an applied behavioral science consultancy really advocating for consumer psychology. So how do guests and investors make decisions? Sometimes they can't always tell you. So we really look at the psychological drivers and the cognitive heuristics and biases that inform decision making. So oftentimes the way that brands can work is they become what I call a mental shortcut in terms of choosing. Maybe you're going on a trip to Bratislava and you've never been, or maybe you're going to Bahia in Brazil and you've never been. Just by looking and seeing which brands are in that city gives you an indication of what kind of destination it is. Or if you see a concentration of particular brands that you know and you like or you think are quite high-end in a certain neighborhood, it tells you about kind of where you might be spending your time. So it becomes a choice architecture device. Choice architecture just means we make decisions within the context that they are. If you go to a supermarket, there's 200,000 products. You can't rationally go through all of them. Similarly, if you're looking for a hotel room on an online, aggregator, and there's 700 hotels in Bratislava, you're not going to realistically use all those search criteria to whittle down. But if you start recognizing brands, it's a shortcut to making a selection. The other thing that brands do is they provide a bit of a shorthand on value. And value, from a behavioral science point of view, is not just about value for money, but it's about what am I putting in, effort, time, money, going that little bit further outside of town to get to that hotel for the experience that I'm anticipating of getting back. So it's really a trade-off of time, effort, and investment versus what I'm getting back. And brands, again, are a bit of a shorthand for that. I know that a Waldorf Astoria experience is going to be like this, whereas an Ibis budget might be like this. And depending on the job to be done by that hotel stay, we assign certain value, and the brands, again, are that shorthand. And I think it's important sometimes to think about the jobs to be done. It's very easy to think about hotel guests as these segments, that Chris is a very high-end traveler. He's a very Four Seasons, St. Regis guest. Well, sometimes, but sometimes he's on a in-and-out business trip to Manchester and he's maybe a Novotel guest. Or sometimes he is being adventurous and is in a, shared accommodation, Airbnb style of accommodation. So I think it's important to think about the job to be done by the hotel night or the VRBO or Airbnb, and using, again, brand as that shorthand value. You're not going to spend a lot if you're on a really quick up and down trip to Manchester for business, but you might be willing to if you're taking your spouse on an anniversary trip, etc. So shortcut to selection and shorthand for value is really how brands can work in the consumer psychology when it comes to choosing where to stay. Yeah, that's trickier. So I'm not an expert on all the fees that are levied on investors, etc. But what I would say is that it's when you know the jobs to be done of travelers to a certain destination, that helps to inform you on which brands might align with those jobs to be done. And then of course you need to think about what's the competitive set. If you have a hotel brand X that's very similar to hotel brand Y and they're just 700 meters down the beach from each other, you may want to think about, is that the right brand to place there? But again, I would say come back to the jobs to be done. Can this brand in this destination service a job to be done that makes sense for a wide enough segment of travelers? All the back end stuff on fees and rates per night and all that stuff, I'm not the expert on that, but from a consumer psychology point of view, keep in mind that consumers are choosing not just on price, but on how they ascribe value to the job to be done, and they use the brand to go, yeah, that makes sense for this job, for this trip, I can pay that much. So I think it's very fair to say there's maybe too many brands, but I don't think that will change. I think in our presentation we showed that we were tracking 66 brands in 1995 and now 166, something like that. I don't think that'll change. I think it becomes harder for investors and developers to choose, but it's also becoming harder for consumers to choose. But keep in mind that those brands do have some meaning to certain guests in certain markets. So, Sheraton might mean something very specific to someone traveling from Central Texas who's going on their first trip to Birmingham in the UK, but Sheraton may not have the same meaning for someone coming from Ho Chi Minh City to a business trip in London. So I think that the brands have a cultural context, and that's what informs the meaning that they have for each guest. Should there be less brands? maybe from a kind of total cognitive load of both investors and guests, that would be nice. But I think the trend would be that there's more brands. And I think why there are more brands is that they're trying to address very specific jobs to be done. That I want to have a kind of maximal budget but luxury touches in a health and wellness spa hotel in Jersey or in Bali, et cetera. So I think that when we are seeing brand growth, it's usually because they're trying to address very particular jobs to be done that operator or that investor thinks can be satisfied. So I would say that's a great strategy, but just make sure that it's not so niche that you're not attracting a couple of guest profiles for a couple of jobs to be done. I think it's very easy for me and my team to be obsessed with the guest and to be obsessed with the consumer. But what we know is that the human brain is the human brain. So the investor brain or the developer brain or the brand operator brain is not that different than the consumer brain. We still have things of, kind of mechanisms helping us understand value, helping us understand prestige, luxury, et cetera. And so it's a good reminder to be at something like Hyde to be talking with investors and developers too, and seeing how their psychology works in terms of how they're making decisions, how they're selecting what's worth investing in. We all have the same brain, flawed as it may be, but I think it's a good opportunity to look at how the kind of B2B brain and the B2C brain sometimes line up perfectly, and sometimes there's a bit of a gap that needs to be reconciled.